Welcome to this training video on how to use Asset Optics for Salesforce Lightning Experience. This is the first in a series of videos on the Asset Optics Computerized Maintenance Management solution. Each video will cover one of the several functional areas of the application, beginning with today's lesson on asset management. Our learning objectives in today's video, as you can see here on your screen, is to teach you how to set up and use the equipment/asset record. We'll also be setting up and using several closely related custom objects, as you can see, locations, buildings, meters, and so forth. The first 15 minutes of this video approximately will be mostly an overview of asset management. That is a demo of the relevant objects and the fields on the different records and the definitions of terms. If you want to click ahead to this section of the video in which we create records, I will place chapter links in the description below, and there should be a section that says Part 2, Creating Records. In the application and throughout this video, we will use the terms equipment and asset interchangeably. As you can see here on my navigation bar, the tab is actually labeled equipment/assets. So let's get started first of all with a definition of an asset. We can think of an asset or a piece of equipment as a physical or logical entity upon which preventive and corrective maintenance is performed and work orders tracked. You can always distinguish between an asset and, say, an inventory stock item by referencing that definition. Do I perform maintenance on this? If the answer to that question is yes, it is likely an asset. You may also notice here from my list view that some of these assets have parent asset IDs. As you might guess, you can also organize your assets into hierarchies, which we will see here in a moment. When creating a new equipment record, you'll note that there are three record types to choose from in the dialog. Each of these three options gives you a slightly different page layout and different pick list values. For demonstration purposes today, we'll mostly just be working with the default, which is equipment. You will also notice that the only required field when creating an asset record is the asset ID. This is the Salesforce.name field. It is 80 characters long, and it can be anything that you want. I'll cancel out of this, and we'll just have a look at some of the existing asset IDs that we have in this sample data set. These data are from a brewery. You can see that in some instances we use a plain language name, and in fact, in many of those cases, the asset ID and the description are identical. In other cases, we gave some assets names that have a prefix and a numerical suffix. You could also use a serial number or really anything you want. But because that's the only required field, this makes it really easy for new users to get up and running simply by importing, say, a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet of their existing assets. We'll have a look at a couple of these asset records, and we'll see some of the fields that are on the record and how we can use those to help us better organize our equipment. Most of these items, as you might guess, are physical assets, such as a fire extinguisher. Some of them, such as this fermentation line, however, you might think of this as a logical asset or perhaps a system. When we look at this record, for instance, what we will note right off the bat is that it is part of a hierarchy, and there are actually several components or assets that are subordinate in the hierarchy to the overall fermentation line. But let's have a look at a record that has some more details on it. From my recent list, I think I'll pull up, let's say, this fire extinguisher. Again, we see the asset ID, which is the one required field, the description here, fire extinguisher. Next up, we have location. This location is not the standard Salesforce object known as location, but rather this is a custom object that's part of the managed package. We define locations as physical or logical areas where equipment/assets are located. Similar to assets, locations can also form a hierarchy. This is a hyperlink here because it's in blue, and if we wanted to click on this, we'd see that this brewing facility location is actually the top level of a hierarchy. In the right-hand pane, we have this Lightning Web component that allows us to expand the parent, the top level location, and see all of the child locations. Similarly, you can see it here in the Quick Links pane or on the related list over here, child locations. You will note that there are additional lookups here. We see all of the assets that are stored within this location, or rather associated with this location. Any work orders for any equipment that are contained in this location will also be here on a related list or in the Quick Links pane in the upper right-hand corner. But let's go ahead and return back to our asset record, the fire extinguisher. Continuing to review the fields on the equipment/asset record, we come to account. This is the lookup to Salesforce accounts if you wanted to associate certain pieces of equipment with an account. And then we get next to another custom object. This one is called space. Space is the third tier of a three-tiered hierarchy, the top of which is a building. Beneath buildings, we have floors, and beneath floors, we have spaces. For many customers, the functionality of space and location are similar or can be interchangeable. However, here, buildings, floors, and spaces refers very specifically to the physical entity which is a building. The reason we have this on here has to do with the fact that in some customer implementations, they perform maintenance on spaces. By default, work orders and preventive maintenance schedules are created against assets, but in a property management scenario, for example, you might want to schedule maintenance on a space, such as an apartment or a bathroom or a conference room. And similarly to locations, when you go to the space object, you will see that it includes all the equipment that's contained within it, any work orders that are associated with equipment that have that lookup back to the space. So that can be very useful. If we look at this one as an example, we will see that this is part of a hierarchy. Floor 1 has 3 spaces beneath it, rooms 101, 100, and 103. If we wanted to create a work order on the specific space, we could do so. I have the buildings tab exposed on my navigation bar, so we could actually just go and look and see what buildings we have here. This headquarters building, for example, again, we see the hierarchical display in this Lightning Web component. We'll go back to our equipment record and continue the review. Next, we see a set of statuses and types. These are pick list values. Not especially important for demonstration purposes, but know that you can set the status of your assets to out for repair, stock inventory, retired, and so forth. By default, when you create an asset, it's going to be in service. There's some additional classifications here for the type of equipment record you're looking at. Some of these are redundant with the record type itself, such as vehicle. In the nameplate information section, we can specify a manufacturer. The manufacturer is also a lookup to Salesforce accounts. These fields are all optional, of course, model number, serial number, and so forth. We have a place down here for nameplate data, which many pieces of equipment will have from the manufacturer. You can cut and paste that information in there. Makes it useful for search purposes. We don't have any nouns specified on this particular equipment record, but let me see if I go to another one, I can demonstrate the utility of that. On this asset record, you can see that there is a noun called pumps, and there's a modifier called centrifugal. Nouns, modifiers, and attributes are all in master detail relationship to each other. Looking at pumps, for example, we will see that there are 3 modifiers associated with pumps: centrifugal, rotary, and transfer. And within each of these modifiers, there's an additional object called attributes. In the case of the centrifugal pump, we have attributes defined as inlet, outlet size, rotation speed, and construction. You can imagine many more attributes for different types of assets. What this does is it really allows you to categorize or classify your assets in a way that makes them easy to organize and easy to find. Additionally, using nouns, modifiers, and attributes saves you from having to create lots of custom record types on the equipment object. Likewise, creating a bunch of custom fields on the page layout for things like horsepower or RPMs, things that wouldn't apply to all assets, like the fire extinguisher we were looking at a minute ago. While we're on this asset record, we can see that there's actually a meter tied to this asset. Meters are instruments that are used to measure runtime, such as miles, hours, cycles, or fuel consumption, such as gallons of use. A meter, of course, has meter readings, and if we take a look at this one, we will see that there are 4 readings. Meter readings are date time stamped, and we can use these meter readings to schedule preventive maintenance. If you think about an automobile, for example, an odometer would be an example of a meter. You can schedule different types of maintenance using one meter, and you can also use the same meter for multiple assets if they're part of a system. So in the case of a vehicle, we'd use the odometer and schedule maintenance such as an oil change every 5,000 miles, a tire rotation every 10,000 miles, and say the change of the cabin air filter every 20,000 miles. These 3 PM schedules, and we'll have a look at PM schedules in a couple of days, they will all look up to the same meter. Similarly, you could have one meter that is the hour meter for a production line, and within that production line you might have 10 sub-assets, 10 different components that together comprise that line, and you could have independent preventive maintenance schedules according to the requirements of each of those assets, all tied to one meter. In this example, we can actually see that there is a PM schedule associated with this meter, and it goes to the mash mixer pump. The model work order description is to replace the seals in the mash mixer. It's a 400-hour service. We'll have a look at this in an upcoming lesson. For now, let's go back to our asset. The next topic we'll discuss is asset groups. Asset groups are ways of, again, categorizing like assets into one group. The purpose of an asset group really is that you can contain within it all of the model work orders, bills of materials, and standard work tasks that apply to a given set of the same type of asset. So, for example, in this group, it's called APV load pumps. There are 2 equipment records associated with this group. They both happen to be mash mixer pumps. They're probably from the same manufacturer, in fact. We have the bill of materials here, which we'll talk about in a second, and the bill of materials for this load pump contains a list of parts, essentially, to perform maintenance and repairs on this item. There are model work orders as well. Model work orders are a topic for Lesson 2 on work management. But for now, model work orders are job templates which are replicated by preventive maintenance schedules. And standard work tasks. These will also be covered in Lesson 2 on work management. Standard work tasks are a very granular level in which you can define or predefine work to be performed. The standard work task will include the craft or skill group that's going to do a specific piece of work, and we use these to build work orders. But for today, we want to focus on bills of materials. So as I said, a bill of materials is a list of service parts or repair parts associated with an asset group. A bill of materials can contain really dozens or hundreds of items that are usually specified by the manufacturer. This is an example of the bill of materials for the APV load pump asset group. So this would apply to those mash mixer pumps. As you can see, the BOM item, bill of material item, has its own ID number. It's linked to an item master record, which is, again, something we'll cover in a future lesson. But this is the enterprise catalog identifier, the item description, and a BOM quantity. Performing maintenance on an asset, if there is a bill of materials associated with that asset, you can pull that up within the work order, and it can help you select parts. So let's see what that would look like. Let's go back to our mash mixer pump, which we can find here under the Equipment tab. We see this mash mixer pump has in the related list multiple work orders, mostly preventive maintenance work orders, but here's a corrective work order, number 259. So if I were planning this job, or if I was a technician who had received this work order and I knew that I needed to add some parts, one thing I could do is I could click on this button up here, this action that says Bills of Materials. If there are bills of materials available for this particular asset, there could be more than one. It will prompt me to choose the bill of materials. And when I click this, it is now going to present to me all of the inventory items, all of the stock items that correspond to items in that bill of materials. These are actual parts that are in inventory, and I can add these to the work order by selecting them and clicking that button. So that's just one example of how that could be useful. We'll look at work orders in the next lesson, but you can see how having the bill of materials on hand can help in your work planning. With that, we've now concluded the first part of this video. We've introduced and defined several key terms that relate to asset management. In particular, we've looked at the equipment/asset record and how asset records relate to other custom objects that are part of the Asset Optics managed package. In this next brief section, part 2 of the video, we're going to revisit some of these same objects and create some new records from scratch. This will be very familiar to experienced Salesforce users, but for new users of Asset Optics, please stick around. In this part of the video, we're going to create a few new records. If you're an experienced Salesforce user, this is going to be second nature to you, but if you're new to Salesforce and new to the Asset Optics CMMS application, some of this will be new to you. Mainly what I want to demonstrate is that there are multiple ways to create records, and depending on the context in which you create those records, that will influence some of the lookup relationships that get pre-populated on the resulting record. So if we want to create a new equipment/asset record, from this tab, from the equipment/assets tab, we can go to the down caret here and click new equipment/asset, or here in the main display area, there's a button that says new. They both present you with the same option, which here is to select the record type. Here we're just going to accept the default record type, which is equipment. For asset ID, I'm just going to give this one a plain language name, beer filter 2, and I'll use the same for the description. Another way we might create an equipment record would be from a parent record. Let's say, for instance, we're on this fermentation line, and we know that this is where we want our beer filter to be. We could create a new child equipment record from the quick link over here. And again, we'll see the same form here, but pre-filled will be the parent asset ID. So this time when we create beer filter 3, an additional piece of information is already linked. And of course, when we go to this record, what we're going to see is the asset hierarchy filled out in this Lightning Web Component. You may notice that beer filter 3 is at the top of this list rather than at the bottom somewhere where we might expect it. That attribute is actually defined on the equipment/asset record here as hierarchy sort order. This is user defined. I'm going to change this to 30 as an example. And when this component refreshes over here, you'll see that it moved down the list here. The original beer filter was hierarchy sort order 50. So if I went back and I changed this one to say 45, it should now appear where we want it in the hierarchy. And it just moved. But what about beer filter 2? We didn't put that in the hierarchy. So let's go to that asset record and edit it. Now going to choose the parent asset ID, which in this case is fermentation line. And I might define the hierarchy sort order. And as soon as I save, the Lightning Web component refreshes itself, and now we have all the records displayed correctly in the hierarchy. I could also initiate the creation of an equipment record from location, from a space, or maybe in this example, an asset group. If we chose, say, the fire doors asset group, we see that there are 6 existing equipment/asset records. If we wanted to add more to this asset group, we could do that by clicking the New button within the Quick Links pane or on the Related tab. And here again, you will see that the asset group is pre-populated because it's from the asset group that we create this record. So I'm going to call this FD07 Fire Door 7. And this time I'm going to hit Save and New because I want to continue to create assets within this asset group. Now again, because this is part of an asset group, now any model work orders, standard work tasks, or bills of materials that are associated with this asset group are now associated with fire doors 7, 8, and 9, which we just created. Likewise, if we were on a location, let's say dry storage, and from here, on the Quick Links pane or on the Related list, this time we'll do it, we can see equipment/assets that are part of the location called dry storage. So if I created a new asset right here and called it, let's say, I don't know, dry goods hopper 12. I'm making up this description because I don't know anything about dry storage, and I'm going to hit save. So again, now that we see dry good hopper 12, it's already part of this location. Asset groups could be added here, whether they're new ones or pre-existing ones, or, if I navigated through the building floor space model, I could specify the specific space. Everything is available to you when you create records anywhere within the application. And like I said, depending on the object that you're kind of springboarding from, some fields may be pre-populated. Creating any record in Asset Optics, whether it's equipment, buildings, location, bills of materials, it's all going to be pretty much the same. I did want to return to one thing before we close out today's lesson, and that is the special consideration you might give to not so much creating, but editing records of certain type. Equipment and locations come to mind, things that have hierarchical relationships potentially. If we go back to the beer filter or the fermentation line that we created a few minutes ago, we only quickly touched on the hierarchy there. As I showed you earlier, there's a Lightning Web component over here that displays the hierarchy. We might want to look at this in the Related tab for a little more detail, but first let's navigate to the top of the hierarchy, the fermentation line. This is an equipment/asset record. There is a similarly named location record called fermentation, but let's look at the Related tab here. As you can see, the child equipment/asset records, again, the same ones that display in the Lightning Web component, they're displayed here in the Related list. The hierarchy sort order, this controls how these things are displayed in the component over here. So for example, if we wanted to move this item, beer filter, up the hierarchy, we would edit the sort order. Now you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I like to do 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So that way if you ever add or insert things in between, it just makes it easy to adjust those numbers. So here I'm going to say 41 and hit save. You will now notice that when I refresh this page, it has now moved up into the 41 position. Sometimes you'll need to refresh the page to have it display correctly. But now we see that beer filter is number 41 in the hierarchy, and it would have changed places over here as well. Another thing you'll notice is that there were no locations specified on these two records. And again, I could edit those right here. Now that'll be updated. And similarly, you can manipulate location records just the same. And that concludes Lesson 1. If you need more assistance, reach out to us at the following email address or via our website. Thank you and talk to you soon.